I've been through the whole book now probably multiple times, and as you can see, I've highlighted and left notes all through it because I study these things. I don't just read them. I ingest them and practice them. And because there's so much authenticity in these poems, I just felt like I was listening to Rumi talking to me. And I love Rumi so deeply. So I asked Rumi to guide me, and he chose 4 poems for us. The first one is Trust, which is on page 23. And I love that painting. It's a beautiful painting of like a circle of fire with a woman dancing naked with her arms in the air. So if you'd like, feel free. And I'd love to hear it in your native language and then English.
So I have to warn you, I haven't don't know all of these by memory, but
Hmm.
trust I do.
Yeah, well, you
So
can just ad lib. You just do what you did with me all day. It'll be great.
it's like the Farsi speakers are like, what?
Or you can do it backwards. You can read it in English first and then give us the Farsi.
So trust. مژده بده یار پسندید مرا یار پسندید مرا سایه او گشتم و او برد به خورشید مرا برد به خورشید مرا جان دل و دید منم جان دل و دید منم گریه خندید منم یار پسندید منم یار پسندید مرا.
Beautiful.
So for this painting I chose a couple of verses, and that's kind of what happens. A couple of verses just keep going and going, and I just in this circle with is the same thing going and going. مژده بده یار پسندید مرا. Oh lovers, rejoice. My beloved has seen me. I don't know how the alchemy of love made me into this, but my tears have turned to laughter, and a mirror is looking upon another mirror. The idol facing the Qibla has bent down and kissed me. I am now Qibla, bring your prayers to me. My secret? I followed my beloved's shadow, and I'm taken to the sun.
That's beautiful. Can you read the exercise you suggested for us?
So the poem in action for this one says, sit in a comfortable spot and close your eyes. Think of a person or being you trust. Imagine them protecting you like a cocoon. Inhaling, feel the trust. Exhaling, become relaxed. Notice sensations such as pressure, heat, or tingling in your body. Continue for 10 minutes or longer. And it has a bonus section too, which if you're comfortable with that and you want a little
Yeah.
more poem in action,
This is
it
Living
says
4D with Paul Chek. You can dance naked on the table. You can paint. You can paint my face if you want.
it says when you have a few moments in the middle of your workday, conjure the same feeling of trust in the meditation. Notice the change in sensations as the feeling washes over you. Resume work. Does this feeling change your relationship with the task at hand?
Yeah. So that brings me. What I want to do is chat a little bit about trust with you. Trust can be very hard for us, especially if we've been wounded by the people that we love. And as we discussed earlier, I got very wounded by my stepfather and the pain of my birth father leaving my mother and then dying when I was 8 years old, and not understanding what happened to him, and nobody explained it to us. And I had quite a profound thing happen to me. My grandma and grandpa, who I will talk about in a second, were coming to see us, and my mom I think, was probably trying to protect us from the pain of it all. So it was kind of swept under the rug and wasn't talked about. And my mother had a lot of pain with my father, my birth father, because he was very violent with her and abusive. But my little boy's soul only knew his love for his daddy. None of that stuck to me like it did to her. And um, I, I had a very profound dream, probably my first memorable lucid dream, and I found myself floating above his funeral. And my grandma and grandpa were there, and a few of my father's friends. And I saw the gravestone, and I saw the people there. And a few days later, my grandparents showed up. We lived at the time, we had a pig farm in Idaho, and my grandma and grandpa showed up from California. And my grandfather started talking to me about my father's funeral. And I said to him, I was there. And he looked at me and he said, Paul, what do you mean? Because he knew I was in Idaho. I said, I had a dream, and I was floating above the funeral. I saw you there, I saw Grandma there, and I saw a bunch of other people there. And I said, I saw his gravestone, and I described it to him, and my Grandma and Grandpa were just shocked because I described exactly what the gravestone was. And so that was probably my first sort of profound mystical experience, if you want to call it that. And unfortunately, my stepfather was a very violent man, and created so much pain that ultimately led to my brother committing suicide when he was 34 and left all of us scared all the time. The stories are too painful and probably even too shocking to share on a podcast unless it was just a bunch of people in a healing group that wanted to that had the strength to go through it. But the poem really brings me to the deepest memory of my grandma and grandpa, who were actually my father's grandma and grandpa, so they were my great grandparents. But when I hear that poem, I remember being a little boy laying on my grandmother in bed on her chest and feeling she had big boobs, and I could hold her and hug her. And my mother worked so much. My mom worked 2 8-hour-a-day waitressing jobs back to back, and we were raised by a babysitter until my mother had met my stepfather. So I pretty much lived my whole life with babysitters and rarely ever saw my mom. When I did, she was just completely exhausted. But when my grandmother would take us, and I developed asthma as well as a side effect, I think, of a lot of this trauma, my grandmother would hold me and talk to me, and she just had so much love, and my grandfather was so loving. And so as you're reading the poem, actually, when I first read it, my grandmother just appeared inside of me, and I saw, it's right now it's making me want to cry. But my grandmother was the first person I really had deep trust for, and when she died, it was quite hard on me, because I didn't know who in the world I could trust. I could trust my mother, but my mother was in so much pain and working so hard all the time. There was no way I could really trust that she would be there. And so I'm just curious, who is it in your life that gives you that sense of trust?
Oh my God, so many.
Yeah.
Some of them are alive. Some of them are not even. Maybe they're just kind of shapes. I don't even. My father was definitely someone I trusted. He was a really beautiful man. The Ramana Maharshi, which I didn't know anything about before. One night he came to me, and he was just like, all I could feel was love.
He's a Hindu saint.
I know.
Yeah.
completely out of the blue.
I've
And
read one of his books. It's in my life. It's beautiful.
yeah, so he really connected me to silence,
Mm.
and he was a really beautiful guide in my life. He still is. I summon his presence. I feel him inside me
Mm.
so much. Um, I had one uncle I had who died when I was 6. Also, someone I really trust. Um, my husband is definitely someone I trust.
Mm.
My kid, my son,
Mm-hmm.
um, I trust the earth
Mm.
more than anything. The
Yeah.
earth, trust the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And all so many of the creatures. In fact, they're very like trust is my regular state. So yeah, I'm
Mm.
like I go from like the fool that you were talking that
Mm-hmm.
you so resonate with. I know that there is no difference between um, pleasure and pain. No
Yeah.
difference between suffering and enlightenment.
Mm.
So anything in life always brings me to that. I'm just trusting life with whatever flows.
Well, you began your life with bombs flying, so I'm sure you, something inside of you obviously stabilized you. You know, you talked about how you were reciting poems off the rooftops. So, and as you said, you came into it with Rumi in your blood. So it's, maybe you've been through so much in past lives that you've come equipped for deep trust.
I do know when the bombs were falling, when there was any moment that we could live or die. Those were really beautiful, peaceful moments. So there was no fear of death,
Mm.
and it, I would, the war spanned like 8 years. So this happened a few times in Shiraz, where but the ripples of the terror is go. So people are constantly afraid. Like a
Mm-hmm.
door slams and teenagers are having a heart attack,
Mm.
and they're getting gray hair
Wow.
because the stress of that survival stress is so intense. But yeah, there would be times where I would just feel so much of that stillness and peacefulness.
I think for me, um, I had to grow into that, and I used to have a beautiful relationship with our pigs. And when we moved to Vancouver Island, we had a 140-acre sheep farm and loads of sheep and pigs and horses and cows and chickens and goats. And I remember being a little boy with a lot of emotional stress, and I had to take care of the pigs all the time. And we had, big 450, 500-pound pigs that we would take to slaughter. But it used to always be hard for me because I became their best friend. I fed them, I cleaned their cages, and I used to ride them, and I used to love riding pigs because they always spin in circles and try to throw you off.
A little rodeo.
Yeah, and I actually rode in the rodeo when I was young
Oh
too.
my God.
So the
Is there
pigs,
anything you haven't done?
well, probably, um, the pigs were such beautiful animals and so gentle and so loving. And when they throw me off, they'd come sniff me, and you can feel their wet breath coming in. They'd be almost like they were mothering, like, "Are you okay?" And so I developed a lot of trust with the pigs, and through my life, as I deepened my connection to the earth, I got the trust of the earth. But through all the pain, I really came to the realization that I couldn't trust anything more than I could trust God, and I had to penetrate. I had to penetrate. Um, I had to penetrate the veil of the illusion. And as I shared with you, I began having out-of-body experiences at 12 years old, and I realized that I wasn't stuck, and I could go anywhere. And as I practiced, I found that I could go to the sun, to the moon, to any of the planets, anywhere I could put my mind to, I could go to. So I started realizing that a lot of the things that they taught in Christian Sunday school about God were just terribly wrong. And then when my mother joined the Self-Realization Fellowship and I got to talk to the monks, I realized, oh my God, there is people here that have a viewpoint on God that matches the experiences that I'm having when I'm doing these out-of-body experiences. But later I began to be very curious what the soul was. And right behind you, there's probably close to 150 books on the soul back there. But I found it very frustrating because every single one of these authors would talk about the soul, but nobody would ever tell you how do you have a relationship with it, how do you connect to it. There's no agreement on what it is. And so I found this with almost everything I've looked into in my life. So I reached the point where one day I just simply, and I'd had mystical experiences where God had spoken to me on 2 specific occasions. So I knew that God was listening and I could talk to God. So I just said to God, how do I find my soul? And the answer came back within myself, simply ask. And so I remember the day that this happened. It was probably 15 or 20 years ago now, probably 20. I was sitting in my sauna in meditation, maybe probably 15 years ago. And I just said, my dear soul, if you can hear me and you're really there and you're really real, show me a sign that's undeniable. And all of a sudden, my whole body filled with energy like an artesian well. And it was as though energy shot up through my body and right out the crown of my head. And I went, oh my God. And I had this sense of, like goosebumps, like this was undeniable that I was getting a response from my soul. So my first thought was, there's no way I could fake that because I don't even know how to do that to myself. So I said to my soul, if that's really you, do it 3 times in a row so I'm sure it's you. So sure enough, big energy surge. And so that began my dialogue. And so every day I would go into meditation and talk to my soul, and I developed a language so that I could speak in this energetic language. So my soul showed me what a no was, and my soul showed me what it feels like when it wants me to go forward, to go backwards, to turn left, to turn right, to look up, to look down. It showed me how it could guide me to passages in books or choose which book. And so it began to guide all my studies and tell me right what pages to go to get the important parts for when I was developing lectures or new courses. It would show, my soul shops for me on Amazon. It guides me. Most of these, probably half these books were chosen by my soul. So then I began to, in my studies of Rudolf Steiner, I came across Steiner's model of the soul. And Steiner just says that anything that has an inside and an outside, including an atom, has a soul. And so he describes the architecture of the soul, which I won't go into because it'll take a while, but I realized that what we call soul is everywhere. It's in the rocks, it's in the plants, it's in the trees, it's in the birds, it's in the bees, it's in the animals, it's in anything. And so through that relationship, I developed the deepest level of trust I've ever had, because my initial experiences with God talking to me were actually so wild that I was afraid to tell anybody about them, because I thought my parents would take me to the hospital and have me checked out as a psychopath or something. So I sat on that and really never talked about it, probably till I was 35 or so. And then I realized I needed to teach my students, because so many of them had a lot of trauma in their lives too, and felt very alone in the world. So I thought, well, I have to teach them how to have a relationship with their soul, because only God can give us a soul, and therefore it is God within you. Soul is God as you. And so I developed this language and got to the point where I was absolutely sure that I knew what I was teaching, and had such amazing results, and my soul paints with me and does everything with me. And so I learned trust that way. But I think I think it was the path through pain that led me to that deep trust. And as paradoxical as it is, if I had to do it all over, I don't think I would choose an easier path, because I may not have ever found the truth of myself and the trust in myself. So thank you for that amazing poem and sharing where your trust comes from. And I felt I should share what led to mine.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for telling me that story.